This is OffPlanet Radio.
Welcome to another dimension, a dimension of insight, a dimension of understanding. You are entering the place where reality collides with truth. There are no limits, there are no boundaries. This is OffPlanet Radio.
Welcome to OffPlanet Radio. I'm Randy Maugans. It is July the 7th, 2014, 777s, and some people tell me that it is a day of some very strange energies. I've actually enjoyed today. Whatever energetic is pulling on the earth right now, it's definitely cleaned itself up around me. And after all, it is my universe, and it is your universe as well. This is OffPlanet Radio. And we're going to do a UFO update tonight with Doc Vega, he is in the house, and we're going to talk about some subjects that have to do with some of the research that he's been posting out on UFOdigest.com. And we're going to talk about pilots and UFOs and some other very interesting and strange things. As always, we kind of bounce off of each other, kind of riff like good musicians. And Doc, welcome to OffPlanet Radio again.
Thank you, Ray.
So you are constantly writing and researching in a lot of different areas. You write on part of politics, cover politics from, I guess, what we would consider to be sort of a libertarian Tea Party type mode. And you also do a fair amount of research and articles that you post out. I guess UFO Digest is your primary place where you're posting these. Is that correct?
Definitely.
And do you have a website, Doc?
Yeah, it's docvega.com, and that kind of exhibits three fictional novels that I have that all deal with close encounters, science fiction, and the convergence of even politics. The concept of freedom and constitutionality, even interjected into those works.
You and I were talking off air. All of these subjects kind of intersect at some point, and if we can use the term, I think exopolitics meets what we would call conventional politics on a lot of fronts. We're dealing with something that I believe our government has hidden from us. I believe our government's probably also hidden the technology that they've gleaned from crash retrieval sites as well, and I think that a lot of this goes into a lot of the different black budget operations that we talk about a lot. So, Doc, where do you want to begin with this? You've got 3-part article posted up over at UFO Digest dealing with what you call the classic UFO pilot dilemma. So, you want to kind of open this up for us?
Sure, Randy. When we're talking in terms of the classic UFO pilot dilemma, we have a conflict of interests between the secret agenda of the U.S. government, which seeks to officially deny that the phenomena exists, yet they are going to send up our brave men and women, our pilots, our interceptor, pilots from the armed services, to defend our airspace against the unknown. And going all the way back to 1971 and 1972, when Henry Kissinger negotiated the SALT I and SALT II treaties, there was stipulations made within that agreement between us and the Soviet Union to share information about UFOs so that there would not be accidental exchanges of force between the U.S. and the Soviet Union based upon misidentification of UFOs. Now, you have this in writing, it's written in stone, and yet when an interceptor pilot goes up against the unknown and witnesses fantastic circumstances, and either his aircraft is outclassed, or he disappears and vanishes, or he crashes, or he lives to tell about the experience, and he comes back and he makes a public statement, then he faces possible discipline, degradation of his career, being in direct conflict with some kind of federal regulation that could even land him in prison. You know, and I'm looking at this, you know, this situation, you know, that these pilots have to face, and it's just incredible, you know. I mean, you're out there for the sake of your country, you know, and your countrymen, and you run into something like this, and then you are put into question, you know, after the circumstance, depletes itself, and, you know, you're left in the stunned wake of a sighting that you can't explain, and you're driving a multi-million-dollar aircraft that's supposed to be the product of the best technology that our government has to defend our airspace with, and yet you, in all likelihood, are defenseless against it. And this, to me, represents the classic conflict of interest, and the classic, situation that every pilot faces, when they run into a close encounter of the third kind.
The history of this goes back a long way, even before Roswell, because we've got a lot of researchers out there that have documented sightings during the first two world wars. So we're not dealing with a new phenomenon here. It appears that even though I've always pegged the UFO era, as it's so-called, at 1947, largely because that's when you had this pin in the map called Roswell, but you also had the beginning of the national security state.
At that point, I think we had an accidental admission at that point.
Well, here's the thing that I look at. You can suppress something for only so long. It's going to squirt out somewhere, and the UFO phenomena has been squirting out all over the place for decades now.
Thank God.
Yeah. But it would be so much better, especially for those of us who have had experiences and sightings, if our government would dignify the presence of these craft and their acknowledgement of the existence of extraterrestrials rather than making everybody appear to be crazy.
Right. Well, repudiation, denial, that's always been an intelligence tactic used to basically marginalize or dismiss the inconvenient truths that our government has to deal with. It happens on all kinds of, levels, unfortunately. And, the pilot, whose job it is, on our behalf, to go up there and defend our nation, are unfortunately experiencing the brunt of that, that mentality when they go out and experience, UFO encounters. And they're a lot more common than we're led to believe. They're not just 1 in 1,000. There's been an estimation that as far as abductions and sightings and pilot to UFO encounters number in the hundreds of thousands over the period globally of a year. And yet we only get a very, very small percentage of those reports because, number one, our press that was, constitutionally guaranteed as one of our rights, freedom of the press, has been compromised by the federal government. And we don't get the real news, and a lot of times it's even what we get from foreign sources like the BBC and so forth is even filtered, by the time we get it. So a lot of the inconvenient truths aren't even included, feeds that we get. So God only knows, how many, what the true representation of sightings really is, and of those, how many of those classic pilot, encounters, has occurred.
So give us a little bit of some specific pilots and pilot phenomenon that you found in your research, Doc. Take us back in time a little bit. And
well, you know what I like to do is I like to go back into the past and put another analytic spin on it, that has not been previously, explored. Let's look at Captain Mantell in 1948 over, Goddard, Air Base in Kentucky. He's requested, to go take a look at a glowing object that's been loitering in the area for the last 45 minutes, spotted and identified by the, air traffic controllers, and they request him and his flight to investigate. So, he is in an unpressurized cockpit, that is designed only to take him to about 20,000 feet, before the threat of anoxia, could affect the pilot. So he takes himself and his flight of 3 accompanying P-51 Mustangs, and I'm not sure whether at that time or not, I think they were probably redesignated F-51s by that time. P stood for pursuit, F stood for fighter. So I'm probably thinking that, that it was considered to be an F-51 by that time, post-World War II. So he is climbing, and he's observing this huge metallic reflective object above him, and he appears to be gaining on it, and his comments have all been well recorded to the air traffic controllers. But now there's another story that I know of where they're actually saying that this was even relayed to high command in Washington, D.C. when they knew that this was going on, and there was another set of ears, extremely high-ranking brass, that were listening to this conversation that was going on. Also, there was a British intelligence officer that was at the crash site, where he unfortunately, plowed in. And there were a lot of inconsistencies there, too, as to the actual condition of the wreckage, which did not support, the official version that, he lost consciousness and his plane just spiraled, down into the ground. There was an observer that said he actually saw the plane orbiting, and then it exploded and then went down. The British intelligence officer actually said that the plane appeared to have been amazingly intact for falling supposedly 30,000 feet. There were other, people that said that the plane appeared to be perforated with holes, which would have indicated an aggressive response from another aircraft, which, what other aircraft was there but this glowing object? But getting back to Mantell and the mentality, okay, he's a seasoned World War II veteran who had hundreds of hours in flight, okay? He's a young captain, and he's got target fixation. And target fixation is very common among fighter pilots. I mean, when they're in a duel, when they're in a dogfight, I mean, sometimes they will stay on the tail of the foe that they've been shooting up, make sure he goes down, and sometimes it is even reacted in such a manner that they were hit by flying debris from the very aircraft they had just destroyed, and they themselves go in and crash because their aircraft has been damaged. So a lot of times in training, they have to say, look, watch out for target fixation. Don't sit there and keep zeroing in on your foe. If you've got him flamed and he's smoking, let him go. Don't sit there and keep following him. And sometimes, it's a numbers deal. They want credit, as an ace for that kill, so they'll keep following, that plane almost all the way down to the ground. But Mantell, I think, was fixated maybe partially out of his amazement over something that appeared to be extraterrestrial, as well as the fact that, he was a combat pilot and it was his job to pursue the enemy. So, we have two factors there. And the man was brave enough that one of his wingmen actually replied, whatever it was that he saw was more important to him than his life or his family or his country, because he continued to pursue, beyond, obviously, the envelope of his aircraft, which to me proves the legitimacy of what it was that he was after. I mean, it wasn't the planet Venus, as J. Allen Hynek, the astrophysicist consultant, had said, and which is, so typical of this idiotic dismissal, by the authorities.
So I guess at this juncture, we're starting to. Let me ask you this: when these stories are told, how do we authenticate the information that we've gotten when you're doing the research? In the case of Ruppelt, he published a book. Is that correct? The report on UFOs.
1956.
Okay, so this is really early. I mean, this is like one of the early military people that's coming out and reporting this.
As I understand, he was considered to be the inner sanctum at the time, because he was the first official source that came forward. Even before the director of the CIA, Hellinger, a former Navy admiral, made a sweeping statement in 1960 in the New York Times that basically said, UFOs are not illusionary, they are not mirages, they are real, and, military misleading the public as to, I'm paraphrasing, is a deadly and possibly, very, destructive practice. And Ruppelt, basically, he was ahead of the curve. I mean, this guy, he's an aeronautic engineer, a former, gunner on a B-17 bomber, in World War II. Mm-hmm. And he's forth, very courageously, and admitting, that the Air Force was beyond itself. They didn't know how to deal with it. To me, it feels like, at least from the standpoint of what you would view as the, quote, military, these guys are always talking out both sides of their neck. You get a disclosure like Captain Ruppelt, and then you get somebody on the other side that then engages the deny everything tactics that they're famous for. So the American public and all of this is left in the lurch, trying to assemble some reasonable information. Not that any of this was covered in mainstream press at the time, I imagine. No. They, any denial that the government, generally came up with at that point was always accepted by the press. Maybe with a few, cynical, remarks during the course of an article, but generally, it was accepted and designed, to render the public's hysteric reaction, to a minimum.
So we still have basically plausible deniability because the media will never touch this story. Mainstream media.
Look at what the media is doing now, with the Obama administration. Yeah, we definitely have plausible denial,
Yeah, this again is because our media was co-opted, and our media is really, mind control, the major networks. I don't know what they put out. I don't watch them anymore.
Yeah, you're better off. You can think freely when you're beyond the constraints of the illusions that have been created to control the masses.
So moving forward here a little bit in the narrative, Doc, do you want to talk a little bit about Lieutenant Gorman?
Well, this is another one of those really solid encounters, and it was an actual dogfight, between a seasoned combat pilot who was a lieutenant, and, he's coming down, for a landing when he notices what he thinks are the taillights of another aircraft that the air traffic control tower is not aware of. So they have already said, hey, there's a Cessna in your area, be advised. Well, he knew where that was. But 500 feet below him is an object that is not apparently being tracked by the air traffic controllers. They didn't have radar back then, not to the caliber that we have now. And they did also have, people in the tower that used, binoculars to spot, any unreported traffic. The guy's wondering, what the hell is this doing down here? And he goes, I'm going to go after it. And he advises him. He says, I see traffic, 500 feet below me. I'm going to identify it. And they said, fine. So he goes after it. Now, he's driving an F-51, a B-51 Mustang. It was the preeminent fighter of World War II. And there were many fighters, the F-6F, the F-4F, the British Spitfire, the ME-109 that the Germans had, the Focke-Wulf 190, but the Mustang was faster, more maneuverable. It's only, with the Merlin engines, that were made by the British, it was just unbeatable. And the only thing that held the Mustang back was it was water cooled. So if you got a bullet, in the cooling system, then you could overheat the engine, and the pilot would, he'd lose his aircraft. Other than that, it was unbeatable. The Germans hated it, the Japanese hated it. And Hermann Göring and Adolf Galland both knew that when the Mustang came along, able to escort bombs 2,300 miles, across, Europe, Germany, bombing threats, they knew the war was over. And I really don't even think, arguably, there's a better fighter in World War II. But getting back to what we're talking about, so he's flying venerable fighter aircraft, and he knows what he's doing with it. So he goes into a number of acrobatic maneuvers. He's chasing this damn thing down, just like somebody would if they were going to shoot it down. And he comes into two potential head-on collisions. One time he chickens out, and veers off, from a head-on collision with this object. The second time around, it zooms above him. At incredible speed and altitude, and at that point, he loses contact with it. But he's flying over 400 miles an hour, during this series of dogfight maneuvers, and, he cannot intercept it or cut it off or whatever. But he did have close enough contact that he almost hit it, head on twice. So it's not like he was outclassed that badly.
Now, what part of his description lent itself to describing this thing finally as being some sort of, quote, balloon?
Well, that's just it. That was the Air Force's official version. It had nothing to do with a balloon. Even Edward Rappelt, reported, in his, how should I say, his review of the incident. He said the Air Force had written it off as being a balloon that had a running light on it, that was just floating around. And Gorman saw it, and every time he dived on it, of course, the force of the propeller and the aerodynamic force behind his aircraft would just basically blow, the balloon to one side or above or beneath him. So, he's thinking all he's looking at is the light. So, he comes back around for another pass and another pass and another pass, and the thing just keeps eluding him. Well, that's not what was happening. This damn thing was outrunning him, and he's going 400 miles an hour. It wasn't bouncing off of his, his propeller. And he was talking about a disc. He was talking about a disc, that was, such a size and in diameter, and it was round and flat. Now, I don't know of any particular running light or reflective surface on a weather balloon that fits into that category. Okay? But this is just typical of, when you have official denial. You will get an idiotic explanation, and just like Goebbels, the disinformation, prime minister for Hitler, said that if you repeat the lie enough times, the people will believe it. The bigger the lie, the more they will accept it if you repeat it enough times. And unfortunately, and I really regret to say this, we've seen that even in our own society, which we supposedly pride ourselves, on as being more free of expression than fascism. And I don't know, I'm seeing less and less of that, in this day and age.
Well, we go off on a tangent here for a second. Because the depravity in the culture as a result, it's like now we're in this vector where the government has deceived and lied and taxed people to death and promoted illegal wars all over the world while running all these intelligence and counterintelligence operations. And the people themselves, and I can't tell which is cause and which is effect, or if it's just this age we're in, Doc, but, I look at the culture now and I go, I guess people really do have the government they deserve because they clearly don't merit a better government. They're not asking the right questions. They're not paying attention. They're a hell of a lot more interested in watching Miley Cyrus bear her butt than they are in finding out what their government's actually doing behind the scenes.
Yes, definitely. There's no doubt about it. I mean, it's all about ball games and the
diversion,
tailgate parties and the reality shows, and it's just reducing the mentality of the population and dumbing them down. It's incredible, and they're going with it. They're going for it.
Yeah, sadly they are. And I keep saying, even though I see a lot of darkness out there, occasionally I see little pinpoints of light. I see people that look like they're starting to get it. And I guess that's what we hold on to, because otherwise, some days you just wake up and go, gosh, humanity really is, at this point, almost terminal.
Well, if you can take the purveyors of a global government that are about 5 steps ahead of the people, and they're constantly planning and orchestrating conflicts, false flag operations, misinformation, dumbing down the education process, trying to merge all governments in the world based upon a socialistic model, so that everybody, will be knuckled under, by a brutal big government that taxes them to death. Well, that's what's going on, and our brilliant framers of the Constitution, if I could see them alive today, I'd love to see George Washington galloping through, Congress, with a sword, lopping off the heads of these traitors, man. It would. Oh, it's just
I think they saw it coming too. Franklin very casually answered when asked what kind of government they gave us, said a republic if you can keep it, and I think he knew we couldn't. Right. And it didn't last 75 years, frankly, in history after that. The root was rotted very early, I'm sorry to say. And America, the horrible thing about it is that all the things that are great about the country have been used against us. They know they can't defeat us militarily. There's nobody on the planet that can stand toe-to-toe. But because of the way our government was infiltrated and co-opted, they turned us into the globalist bitch for running military operations at the expense of our...
All of our resources are exhausted.
Yeah.
Robert Welch of the John Birch Society made an incredible predictive speech in 1957 where he said that the U.S., would succumb to overtaxation, regulation without representation. We would be turned into a globalist enforcer, that taxes would become untenable. Well, I don't see one damn thing this guy predicted that has not come true. And, to my chagrin and to my ultimate sadness, for this great nation.
Well, and for listeners out there, it may seem like we kind of jumped the shark here, but actually all of this is connected, because we're talking about our best, our brightest pilots, military people, airline pilots, very smart, well-trained people who we trust our lives with when we go into the skies. And yet, whenever they encounter something that's not officially part of the, quote, story, they themselves are discredited. And it's incredible to me that you could even stand with a straight face and admit that this many pilots over time were just, flippin' delusional?
It would seem to me that it would not very much behoove a professional pilot, who is, pretty much the government has invested a lot of money in his training, and he has dedicated himself, to being, the best of the best. And he is going to go and destroy his career by giving false witness about a UFO encounter when, he's actually exceeding his own orders and coming up against, official denial, and he's saying, this is what I saw, this is what happened, and, and I don't care what you're going to do to me, I'm going to report the truth.
Now, we're in a different era, because we're still talking pre-1960s incidents. We're going to move forward a little bit, but I want to say something because you brought it up. At this point in time, we do not have sophisticated electronics, cameras, and telemetry in aircraft like we do today. All of the jets that we have now possess incredible amounts of electronics. My question to you is, given that we now live in this panopticon society of virtual surveillance and spying and rectal probing by the government into our personal affairs, can we expect that we're going to begin to get documentation from pilots, cameras on board, and other types of documentary evidence?
What's amazing? Let's go back to 1948, when a pilot actually got gun camera footage of, what proved to be the first example of alien exhibited stealth. And I'll tell you how it happened. I was watching a Nova documentary that was talking about UFOs, and it was talking about one of the first encounters. And we're talking about an object traveling at 400 miles an hour at 30,000 feet, pursued by a pilot who was ascending, into that height. And all he's looking at is a contrail, but there's no object at the head of the contrail like there would normally be. In other words, there should have been a solid aircraft at the head of that contrail, because the contrail was definitely that signature of an aircraft. It's traveling 400 miles an hour at 30,000 feet. So the pilot pulls up, his aircraft, and he shoots several feet of gun camera footage. It would not be probably for decades later that they reanalyzed the footage and realized that this was a definite exhibition by a superior technology that was basically telling us, you know what, we've got stealth, you don't, and we're going to show it to you. But you're not going to figure it out for a long time to come.
Well, I've long suspected that the stealth technology was developed as a result of other beings' technology being either given to us or was part of some crash retrieval technology.
Right, back engineered, but maybe intentionally. Maybe Pandora's box was open to us. Maybe the Trojan horse, was pushed within the gate of the palace.
I think that's true about a lot of what we see now, Doc. Everything now is off scale, and the UFO thing is not going away. The more coverage it gets now in the alternative media. It's like almost an endless cascade of data coming out constantly. And there's good information, bad information, and there's, frankly, stuff out there on the internet that I think is just crap. But it's interesting to note that there's a hunger on the part of people to know the truth about this.
Do you remember, Randy, going back to '93, the big sensation about the Mexico City sightings? Where I believe there was this one particular Mexican broadcaster who was really
Mm-hmm.
known for capitalizing on a paranormal type cover. His name's Jamie something, I forget his last name, but anyway, I was looking at a lot of that footage that was taken by people that had the, I guess first or second generation camcorders, and to me it looked like a bunch of children's Mylar balloons.
Mm-hmm.
And, even though Mexico City has a long history of UFO sightings, the ones that were, recorded in '93 and really sensationalized by the media, to me, looked like a bunch of children's Mylar balloons. And I couldn't help but get that impression. And I think that's a bad example, that we're both talking about, some of this overhyped.
Yeah. And it seems that gets pushed forward because ultimately the goal is to keep discrediting.
You want to delegitimize the phenomenon, right? So you take the really crappy evidence and you start making a big deal out of it.
Well, this was the same deal with the Arizona Lights incident, where the governor basically very quickly went into denial mode and then later on appears to have recanted his denial, which is fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
So you never know what's going on. See, as long as they can mix it up, as long as they can keep people in a state of cognitive dissonance by constantly churning this information, that is deniability. And it also does exactly what we were talking about at the beginning of the show. When things squirt out inconveniently, they have a way to smack it down again using obfuscation and cognitive dissonance.
Well, yeah, it's just typical counterintelligence tactics. You have a counterintelligence corps, within armed services, which, will vacillate between either plausibility or implausibility. And by doing that, the recipient doesn't know whether or not there is a legitimate, element involved here, so it's always guesswork.
We go through your narrative here, and you mentioned astronaut Deke Slayton. Can you go into a little bit about his UFO encounter while he's flying in an F-51?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how many F-51s have been, have partaken in these UFO chases. But apparently, it was a very, very widely used well-respected aircraft and very dependable, So, as a matter of fact, there was in Vietnam, we had a particular World War II veteran who, as a colonel, fought in Vietnam, used his F-51 to shoot down a MiG-21. Jesus. Of course, he had to bounce a superior, aircraft in order to do it, but to show you that a propeller-driven, aircraft is capable of shooting down, a modern jet,
yeah.
That's pretty amazing,
Yeah, it's kind of like sending a shuttlecraft against the Death Star.
There's a good analogy.
That's my picture of that. But you're right. They're amazing planes.
Juggernaut doing against us, Yeah, that's pretty funny. But anyway, to get back to Deke Slayton, he was one of the original Mercury program astronauts, and this was about we're talking about circa Korean War time. When he was a young, aggressive pilot, and like Gorman, at Hector, Field in Dakota. He's coming in for a landing, and when all of a sudden he notices this disc-shaped object. So he reports to air traffic control that he spots an unidentified, object, and he's going to pursue it, and they give him permission to do so. So he aborts, his approach, pattern, and he goes after the object. he commented that the object was so fast that even when he turned inside of its turn, anticipating that he would cut it off, it still outran him. And then, he pretty much just commented that, well, I've got a, prop-driven, aircraft, trying to pursue a UFO. What did you expect, But, but his resolve, about it, kind of shows that he had some kind of foreknowledge, about the capability of these things. And, there were probably a lot of veterans or pilots that were beating their guns about this stuff and sharing information about it and saying, hey, these things are fast, man, and chances are you're not going to catch up with them,
Well, a lot of the old guys knew this stuff, and none of them talked about it. It was just verboten. It was considered to be insane. And for a career military person, it's suicide to even begin to talk about this. But the information that I've gotten over the years, and even I remember talking with Bob Dean about this, is that it was pretty well known in the military in the 1940s to the 1960s that these things were out there. That's why they did the Brookings Report. I mean, they played that as a what-if scenario. The Brookings Report threat assessment, which came out in, 1960? But
right.
Even though they wrote the document as a what-if kind of scenario, every indication from military people that I know has been that was written from the standpoint that then there was a perception of something they called a threat, and they had to begin dealing with it.
Right. Well, I mean, anything that goes unidentified in U.S. airspace or airspace involving any U.S. bases, around the world, which, that consists of an awful lot of, nautical, square miles. They are unduly, or they are duly responsible, for evaluating, what it is, to identify it, to establish whether or not it does actually represent a threat, and how to deal with that threat. I mean, the Soviets were flying Fox bats, that were outrunning our F-4 Phantoms, in the upper atmosphere, and of course, we were very concerned, what's this new fighter bomber, the Soviets have got, for one particular example historically. So, anytime there's a new technical development by a possibly hostile nation, it may appear as a UFO. It may not. But still, it needs to be identified, and the threat needs to be registered, and there needs to be intelligence developed, about this, new possible threat, to our national security or to our airspace.
I thought it was interesting that you mentioned in this article the fact that Yeager admitted to his family that he was using solo time during test flights to pursue what he called unknowns.
Yes. Yeah, I talked to one of his family members. One of his nephews, and that's what he told everybody. And he actually had a code word that he worked out, with his test controllers. And he would basically, anytime he spotted an unknown or a bogey while he was, test flying, and he was test flying a lot of high-performance aircraft,
Well, this is the guy who actually is the test pilot figure. I mean, he actually created the image of a test pilot in the modern era.
Yeah.
I mean, this is El Supremo in my book.
Yeah, I know. He's the original Maverick, if you will. Among our ballsy test pilots who, they're willing to plow the farm, so to speak, in order to find out, if they can fly the wings off of something. And anyway, Yeager, was basically telling his family two things. I gave a code word, to the control tower when I wanted solo time so I could go after something that looked like a UFO to me. And then number two, or basically rule number, 2 is if, you're interested in a career, in the Air Force or wherever, you don't report UFOs. And he never did officially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, career suicide.
Yeah, and we're talking about, somebody that has a monumental career, and, you definitely would not want to delegitimize, somebody of that status, nor would they want to do that to themselves.
So, other astronauts as well, certainly going past the Mercury program, as we get into Gemini and later Apollo, we now, from an historical perspective, know that some of them also had some interesting encounters. What do you know about that, Doc?
Let's see. McDivitt was in Dallas when he said UFOs are definitely out there, and he was in the Gemini program. Gordon Cooper participated in a number of different programs, not just the Mercury program, was head of a surveillance team taking ground footage when a UFO attempted to land very close to their proximity. When his personnel, started running towards the object that had just landed, it quickly lifted off. He described it as being unconventional, and supposedly sprayed some type of an aerosol, spray on the men as they approached, and it lifted off. They got film footage of it. Under orders and protocol, he expedited, that film footage to High Command, which apparently was the Pentagon. And weeks later, when he inquired as to the disposition of his report, there was no answer and there was no further comment.
Right, yeah.
Gordon Cooper already had previous experience in the mid-1950s when his F-86 fighter squadrons were quickly outclassed, as he put it, by high-flying unidentified objects. And personally, outside of the MiG-15 and maybe the MiG-17, I don't think there was anything that was close to outclassing an F-86 back in about 1954 and 1955.
Not domestic product, no.
No, right, not official product. So, it's, we, had lots of our, and heroically speaking to a lot of our, astronaut program, former fighter pilots, that have, made these admissions that, once again, contradict the official version.
I was just looking here to see where we wanted to go with this. In terms of the chronology that you've mapped out, Doc, what jumps out at you as we get into the modern era, which I consider the space age? Let's mark it there. 1960s forward, post JFK.
Okay. You got X-15 pilot Joe Walker, who was even described intimately by Chuck Yeager, who knew him really well, as being pretty much of an arrogant type of guy. But Joe Walker, basically contradicted, protocol and orders when he reported that there were unidentified objects in close proximity to his X-15 rocket plane. And NASA tried to explain them off as being chunks of frozen fuel that had broken away from the hull of the space plane.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Right. Let's go with that one. And unfortunately, he died, during the testing of a Rockwell XB-70 air superiority fighter bomber. Later on, I think it was sometime in the late 60s, after he had been with the X-15 program. I'm not saying that this is necessarily a pattern, among fighter jocks who have encountered UFOs, but who's to say, exactly, what happened and how and so forth. But there's just a heck of a lot of, it seems to me, witnesses, throughout UFO history that have, died some pretty uncommon deaths, just like Edward Rappelt. 50 years old, dies of a heart attack in 1960. Right, the Air Force pressure him to put out another book which would contradict the report on UFOs that he published in 1956. According to Donald Kehoe, ufologist extraordinaire, he was so brokenhearted by the pressure that he got from the Air Force to basically deny his first book, that it may have contributed to him having a heart attack. And you also have Ryan Woods of the crash retrieval programs that came out in the mid-2000 era, that said that from a statistical standpoint, from insurance analysis, a 50-year-old guy like Edward Rappelt, who was in good shape, the chances of him dying of a heart attack were really nil.
Yeah.
And once again, we come up with the question of, are, some of the witnesses that are closest to the phenomena, are they considered to be expendable enough that they died under clandestine circumstances?
Well, I know that right now I'm looking into claims that have been made that even two of the space shuttle disasters may have been either, depending on whose versions you read, staged or complete hoaxes. Those are pretty incredible claims, and like I said, I'm not repeating gossip here. You're only going to hear it from me once, and then it'll either be fact or we won't talk about it again. But I do find that there are some very strange and compelling things that have happened over the years as regards deaths, disappearances, people who suddenly go silent, people who go away and never talk again. And the fact that a lot of these astronauts, you would think they would be writing interesting books, and most of them have retired quietly.
Yeah. There's been a gifted few that have had the courage to come forth. And, we can be thankful, that we got their testimony, like Gordon Cooper, and people of that stature, that they're high-ranking, well-respected officers, and they have a lot more to lose than anybody else, and yet, they come forward, quite frankly, and candidly report, on the phenomenon. So, I mean, what is it with the debunkers and the deniers that they're going to come up against an expert observer, and they're going to try to tell him that he doesn't know what he's seeing, that he doesn't know what he's talking about? This is what kills me about official denial, and yet, unfortunately, you'll have more people than not that will tend to gravitate on the side of the idiotic explanations of official denial.
Yeah, and like I said, most of these guys, like the man's brain I would love to have picked the most is Buzz Aldrin, because I know Buzz Aldrin saw things he would not talk about.
There's a lot of discussion about what he saw on the surface of the moon. A lot of discussion about it. A lot of speculation.
I had some sources for a time who personally knew him that said that he just didn't want to talk about it. And when you look at the video, and this is actually on YouTube, when you look at the video of the astronauts' press conference, there's something strangely wrong with them when you look at their eyes. And I can't help but think These guys got scrubbed coming in. They were not going to be allowed to talk about what they saw.
Quite possibly. As a matter of fact, Randy, if we go back to the Rendlesham Forest incident, there were a number of security officers who experienced UFO landings within, the forest, that was immediately on the outer perimeter of the SAC base there.
Right.
And who went into the forest chasing, the lights, the airborne lights that supposedly, were, came from an adjacent, lighthouse. Oh, what a bunch of crap, And guys said, that they were actually subjected to very aggressive interrogation that involved drugs. There were several contradictory statements made by the intelligence services of the U.S. and the British concerning the same incident. So you knew right then and there that there were conflicts involved, and the perceptions that were being given to the public, they weren't trustworthy. They weren't on the level, and unfortunately, these poor, security officers, who made the observations, become the cannon fodder. They become the expendables, whom, we'll just go ahead and scrub their brains.
Yeah, it's just incredible.
I'll tell you something that's very disturbing. I was with a UFO group in Plano, Texas, that I was, hanging around and participating in some of the group discussions, and they were involved with Turner,
Dr. Carla Turner. Yeah,
Dr. Carla Turner. She was suffering from a terminal form of cancer, and they were corresponding with her, trying to find herbal and natural cures, to prolong her life or to save her life. And Carla had regressed one of the security personnel that was involved in the Rendlesham Forest incident. Now, this is from these people that are telling me. I did not see this happen. Okay. During the course of the regression, they reported that Carla and the other regressive therapist that she was working with said that the security officer, in the midst of this regressive, hypnotic session, his body began transforming into something that was not human. There was a transformation going on. In other words, it was like he was becoming an alien entity, and they, feverishly worked to and to get him back, to his original persona. They were flipping out.
So this was shape-shifting, or do you think it was demonic?
Right. Shape-shifting, maybe, you might call it, demonic. It's just very disturbing that, the circumstances involving Rendlesham are so inexplicable, and there's so much information involved, and there are numerous witnesses, but, by the same token, it's hard to arrive at, what actually happened, because... Well,
what we know now, and I have interviews online with Barry King, who is at bases in Great Britain, who said, look, the bases that we're talking about here may have been on British soil, but they were under the direction of the NSA. I don't know that we've given a hard enough eyeball to the NSA in terms of what they've suppressed about the UFO ET presence.
Right. Well, just like NORAD. Talking about an agency that would have, an overview of an incredible overview of this subject, and have they come under, really that much?
No, that's like totally bulletproof.
Right. You know, it's just like, what? I mean, you come up against them and you either you run into a stone wall and you can't get any information, or, you know, they're...
Well, this is the workings... This is...
repute. Well, I don't know.
Well, this is the workings of the National Security Act. Because the National Security Act was a partition in the government. It was the first step towards corporatizing our government functions by creating extra constitutional agencies, and now we've got them coming out of our ears. But these extra constitutional agencies, which operate as corporations, which are outside the purview of congressional review and outside of the direction of the commander-in-chief.
They constitute the black budget.
Yeah.
Right. And also, too, it's the very military-industrial complex that Ike Eisenhower warned the American public about, you know, prior to, you know, the end of his presidency.
Beware the military-industrial complex.
Exactly.
But, you know, that's... That was all...
It itself shape policy instead of the conditions that exist in the world.
The problem I have with that statement by Ike is that it was like too clever by half. He really was warning you in hindsight because, look, nobody has clear history about this. I'm convinced that he met with the extraterrestrials. I'm convinced he knew about agreements that were made, and I'm convinced that what he uttered there, while it was profound and deep, masked the absolute horror of the reality of the situation that we're in even to this very day as regarding extraterrestrial presence.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, you know, kudos to the man for doing it.
Formula, isn't it?
I'm sorry.
I mean, it's a very convoluted formula. You have the vested interests of the military-industrial complex, you know, and all of these shadow corporations, and then you have the needs of the people, which obviously are being bypassed, you know, and then you have, you know, what is this agreement, you know, between our government or the shadow government and, you know, obviously an alien presence that, you know, either they can take us or leave us, or they have something to gain from us so that there's room for negotiation. It's just...
Yeah, I
get into a on this deal.
Well, that's the horrible part of this. It's pretty clear that as a superior intelligence, if they wanted to, they could conquer us. I don't get the sense that that's the end game here. I do think that humans are being used as collateral in a much bigger game.
Right. Well, okay, we do have a scenario. Now, according to Philip J. Corso, he claims that we gained parity against alien superiority with the Army HARP program, which we would have a launched missile that atop that missile would be a particle beam weapon capable of targeting multiple targets and firing at the same time. So it's ascending into the upper atmosphere, it is acquiring targets, and it's capable of knocking down several targets at the same time. Now, he claims that that was the one piece of technology that saved us against being on the negative side of the negotiating table. In other words, that was the one trump card we had in our poker hand. You know? Yeah.
Well, you know, it's like...
The advantage, you know, that the aliens had over us.
I think Robert Morningstar, the last time we interviewed him a couple of months ago, put it very precisely when he said that we've been able to maintain control of our horizontal airspace, but we have a real problem with the vertical.
Right. Have we already been infiltrated?
Of course we have. And quite truthfully, history's on the side of the argument that for some reason we saw the escalation coming in our lifetimes. And I think the document leans towards that favor, that at the same time they were always here. Something else kicked in, something else happened, and I've long believed that the atomic bombs were what really escalated this whole thing.
You make a good point, Randy. I actually think that the numerous thermonuclear bomb testing that we did was a way of displaying to them that we will destroy our planet rather than let you take us over if it comes to that. And we have the capability to do it. And as primitive as you think we are, we can still pull it off. That may have been a message to them.
That's an interesting scenario. I've never heard that voiced before. But by the same token, we don't need to destroy the planet. Even our physics now, as we understand it, and it's rapidly evolved since 1945 when we began testing atomic weapons, is that we, with each one of these, whether they were live atomic tests or whether they were the tests that were being done all around the world, I'm thinking specifically of all the testing they did out in the Nevada deserts, that each one of those was creating immense problems galactically in terms of how they were interacting with space-time as we understand it, the ripple effect that is going out across not just even our galaxy, but probably across multiple galaxies. And that there was a deep concern on the part...
That, eventually, but just think of this, Randy. Every star is literally a continuous multi-thermonuclear reaction. Mm-hmm. Okay? So now, perhaps with the incredible gravity, within a star, it controls that reaction in order to keep it from damaging the rest of the cosmos. And perhaps you're right, perhaps, these individualized, detonations that we've been pulling off haphazardly, create some type of a localized imbalance or a fracture, in dimensions. Maybe that's, what might affect their agenda. It's interesting speculation.
Yeah, and I understand. Really, all we can do is make it our best possible speculation, largely because we don't have the hard data to go on.
We've only got a piece of the puzzle. We're looking at a deep puzzle, and just like wildcat drillers, we don't know what's under the surface. We just keep drilling until we get a piece of the action, and then we move on, and based on best evidence.
Best evidence. Wow. I don't think we have that yet. Hey, Doc, as we're winding around the corner here on the hour, is there anything else you want to go over in this show tonight?
Well, I recently made some interesting discoveries about Phil Schneider, and just real quick to go on in, most people just think of Phil Schneider as, he was at Dulce, he did an underground examination structurally as an engineer for the government, and he happened upon, a very, devastating firefight in which he was wounded, and luckily he was saved by a Green Beret soldier that, died, saving his life as he activated the bucket that pulled him back to the surface. And then, he gave this account of what he saw, these aliens that were existing in a very hostile environment, underneath the surface of the planet. But come to find out, he made a lot of metallurgical discoveries. He somehow came upon alien alloys. These alloys have been utilized in our manufacture of stealth aircraft, coatings on the outer hulls of stealth aircraft, turbine parts, heat-resistant parts, even technical materials and fabrications for submarines due to this new type of a a zinc metal alloy that can withstand 7,500 degrees of heat.
Whoa.
You can't, I mean, even under extreme heat, it is not malleable, which, most metal softens. The hotter that you get it, it softens.
Yeah.
And this does not do it. So it's a superior, material, and a lot of it is even made in the close to being perfect vacuum of space, which proves that it's not ours because we're not conducting, those types of metallurgical manufacture in orbit. We're not doing it. We don't have the capability to do it. And then, we come down to also, he was a patriot. He believed in the U.S. Constitution. He believed that the U.S. government was conducting secret damaging experiments and military deep underground bases that are basically dedicated towards a world government. And he said, I'm willing to give my life to my country in order to expose this. He exhibited to the crowd in this particular video I watched a wound he had gotten in his shoulder 2 weeks prior because they were already warning him off and saying, you've already said too much, And he was in violation of his level 1 security clearance already by divulging what he was talking about. He talked about the black budget, which was already $500 million a year in 1995 currency.
Right.
There were 14 different bases, deep underground military bases, located in the Area 51 vicinity alone. Now, he said there were 1,400 at that time, 1,477 underground bases worldwide. He talked about the boring machines. These are using a sophisticated laser that does not convert, the Earth necessarily into magma, but it powderizes it. But it does, around the perimeter of the tunnel, it does melt.
It basically melts it. It melts it to a... Wow. I'm getting nasty feedback.
To a galactic hardness that obviates the need for cement or gunite or concrete. Basically, it's a one-step operation. That dude it tunnels to the Earth and it makes a permanent tunnel.
Yeah.
And that's how much they're using now. He was talking about maglev trains that traverse these tunnels that travel from Mount Rainier, all the way across the nation.
Yeah, I have confirmations of reports by some people who were inside operations of transcontinental. Wow.
We're talking about Mach 1 trains, that are 3/4 of an inch off the surface of a single track.
Yeah, basically
on a magnetic flux.
Right.
Yeah.
Which that's been alluded to as well as existing. I think our phone connection's falling apart, though. I'm getting horrible feedback. I can just barely talk right now. Anything else you want to put out before we kind of head out of here tonight, Doc?
Randy, I just would like to say that my feelings fluctuate between sometimes amazement about all this and revelation, and then at horror. When I think of what the plans are of the powers that be and what they're willing to do to people who are whistleblowers and patriots and whose life means less to them than the future of their own nation, their own beloved nation. That's what disturbs me.
Yeah, it is all of these big issues compounded together, and all of the questions, all of the lies, deceits, and murders that have gone on. My personal...
To be so ruthless just to hang on to the power that they have and consider everyone else to be below them and unworthy of respect and consideration. And just, the mentality of these megalomaniacs is beyond me. It bothers me a lot.
Well, we're not dealing with humans. And, the sooner we understand that, I'm sorry, but, there are people on this planet who I consider to be soulless. And I believe that once you sell yourself out to something this evil and dark, you yourself cease to be human. And so, we have not just psychopathy, but we have hyperpsychopathy inside of a very intelligent yet lacking of spiritual empathy being.
Right.
And the only thing we can do is keep whacking at it. Each one of us has a little piece of this, and we keep pushing at it and pushing at the edges, and, hopefully from time to time some of the stuff bleeds through.
The most important aspect of everything that you and I are talking about is that the general masses begin to come to grips with this and begin to address it and begin to see that we are not powerless. Our government would like us to believe that we have no power, but the truth is, and our founding fathers said, the government was to serve the people, not vice versa. Okay?
Yeah.
The people ever realize the power that they have and that they can stand up and they can rise up against this corruption and they can make a difference, then things will change.
Right. And again, we can't give in to hopelessness and helplessness, because I do believe in a higher power. I believe that spiritually we have the ability to move mountains, and I think as people wake up and realize who they really are and have an understanding of the peril that we live in, we will start to see things turn around.
We have to believe in a higher power. We have to, we have to know that there is a higher power and that there is a reason for ethics and morality. Without it, we're lost, to this ruthless concept of evolution, survival of the fittest at whatever cost. And the ends justify the means. That's not human. It's not compassionate.
No, so the best thing that humanity can do right now is individuals and groups is embrace your humanity and understand your spiritual beings, and that there are things that are worth sacrificing for, as some of the people that we've talked about on the show tonight, which I think is a lot of the reason why we did this, Doc, was to be able to kind of put it on the record that, a lot of brave men have stood up and already given us disclosure. We don't need to wait for a government to give it to us. We just have to wake up to what is.
Right. They're braver than I am, and my hat is off to them. And these are the kind of people that have made that impact. Civilization throughout time and human events. And we need more of them. And we need a public that acknowledges their.
Absolutely. Yeah. If two or three people come away from this interview with a little bit more information about the sacrifice that these men have made, and take this information out and disseminate it, it's going to be worth all the effort we put into it, brother.
Definitely, Randy. Definitely.
Absolutely. Hey, Doc, it's been good talking to you again. Hang on the line for a minute. Yep. And we're going to close it out. This is OffPlanet Radio. I'm Randy Maugans. It is 7/7/2014. It's 777, and we're talking about what you need to know to go out and make informed decisions about the future of humans on this planet, and why we have continued to be in denial about the dangers that lurk out there and inside of our own governments. I'm here with Doc Vega. DocVega.com. You can find him over at UFOdigest.com. The truth is out there. It's inside you. Keep looking for it.
This is OffPlanet Radio.
Let me go with them.